you could see from the videos that the soldiers were sort of carrying out the order, but with no enthusiasm at all. And when the speaker ordered them to leave the building, they did so quietly and in good order. Now, the military is not supposed to obey the Speaker of the National Assembly. They report to the President. And the fact that they simply disobeyed what must have been quite clear orders from the presidential office in favour of following directive by the Speaker of the National Assembly speaks volumes. And I think President Yoon realised that if his military were behaving that way, then his chances of getting them to break at demonstrations were pretty poor.
South Korea's President Yoon Yeol says he will lift martial law just hours after he imposed it, prompting protests on the streets.
I declare martial law to protect the Free Republic of Korea from the threat of North Korean communist forces, to eradicate the despicable pro-North Korean anti-state forces that are plundering the freedom and happiness of our people, and to protect the free constitutional order.
Well, the president had delivered that late-night televised address saying martial law was needed to protect the country from North Korean communist forces and to eliminate anti-state elements. But South Korea's MPs hastily gathered at the National Assembly and voted to block the move. Demonstrators gathered to voice their anger, and some broke through barricades or climbed fences to get inside the building. There were scuffles between police and protesters. The political crisis caught Western allies by surprise. The US State Department said Washington was watching events with grave concern, and President Biden, who's on a foreign trip, had been briefed. The UK government also expressed deep concern and called for a peaceful resolution. Then came a second televised address from the president, lifting the martial law, which he'd announced a few hours earlier. Well, shortly before we came on air, I spoke to John Everard, former UK ambassador to North Korea, who gave me his reaction to the latest twist in the drama.
Well, firstly, President Yoon didn't have that many options. Once the National Assembly had voted, unanimously indeed, 190 president all voted to lift martial law, the Constitution requires the president to implement that decision. So to do anything else, not to lift the martial law, would have breached the Constitution and would have been effectively a coup d'etat. Where do we go from here? President Yoon is toast, to use the technical word. He can now either resign, which would allow him at least to make a departure speech and disappear into the shadows somewhere, or face almost certain impeachment by the National Assembly. The opposition have already said that they will impeach him, hardly surprising given what's happened. They can get that together in maybe tomorrow, maybe 48 hours, but by the end of the week, one way or the other, it's most unlikely that President Yoon will still be president of South Korea.
If we just rewind a bit, John, why do you think that President Yoon, apparently taking everyone by surprise, announced martial law like this?
Well, the immediate trigger was the budget. He runs a minority government, and the opposition was simply ripping the budget to shreds. And he was getting very, very angry at the kind of debates going on inside the National Assembly. But it goes back beyond that. For a long time now, really ever since he was trounced, or his party was trounced in the parliamentary election last year, he's hardly been able to push any of his political agenda forward. There are constant accusations of corruption, both of him personally, his wife, who has not really explained how she came to receive a whole series of really rather luxurious gifts from anonymous donors, and indeed of some of his confidants. So he's been embattled for a long time now. Why now? No obvious reason for the timing. I suspect simply that this was the night when his patience snapped.
But the fragility of his position was exposed, wasn't it, pretty quickly, because we saw the country's MPs gathering to vote against martial law, and indeed demonstrators gathering outside pretty angry.
You're quite right. Very fragile position. We'll probably never know exactly what he planned, but my hunch would be that he intended the military to get to the National Assembly building before the deputies, before the National Assembly members, to prevent them entering the building. And of course, if you can't enter the building, you cannot then pass the killer resolution instructing the president to lift martial law. When he failed then, he instructed the military to enter the building, to remove the deputies. And you could see from the videos that the soldiers were sort of carrying out the order, but with no enthusiasm at all. And when the speaker ordered them to leave the building, they did so quietly and in good order. Now, the military is not supposed to obey the Speaker of the National Assembly. They report to the President. And the fact that they simply disobeyed what must have been quite clear orders from the presidential office in favour of following directive by the Speaker of the National Assembly speaks volumes. And I think President Yoon realised that if his military were behaving that way, then his chances of getting them to break up demonstrations were pretty poor. They probably just stood aside and let the demonstrators do what they wanted to do.
South Koreans are very proud of their democracy, aren't they? Do you think there will be real concern at the way this drama has unfolded? Because it did seem at one stage, just briefly, as though that was being snatched away from them.
Yes, it did, very briefly. I think that there will be endless analysis, comments, and so on all across the South Korean media and in South Korean think tanks. But I think standing back from this kind of smoking crater, the conclusion is that South Korean democracy worked, didn't it? I mean, the president who exceeded his powers was forced to back down, forced to rescind martial law, and as I said, will probably be out of office in a few days, after which fresh elections will be called and a new president will be sworn in. That is the way the constitution is supposed to work, and it did.
We've had the UK government expressing its deep concern. We're also hearing that the government in the US has been following events with deep concern. South Korea is a very important Western ally in that region, isn't it? And clearly there will have been a lot of worry in Western capitals as these events unfolded.
Yes, that's right. The relations between South Korea and the United States and with Japan have long been founded on shared democratic values. And President Yoon seems to have come close to ripping those values up. So I think there'll be a huge sigh of relief in Washington that he's rescinded martial law. I don't think that the relationships with key allies will have been damaged long term. South Korea, Yoon personally, has made rather a fool of himself, but the waters will close over this incident. People will forget it quite quickly and we'll all move on.
And we shouldn't forget that when he did impose martial law briefly, he was blaming North Korea, the country's communist neighbour. And it is that geographical and strategic position of South Korea that makes these events so significant when you look at security across that region.
Yes, absolutely. South Korea is a vital security partner, both for the United States and for Japan. And the three countries have worked very hard over the last, couple of years at building up and strengthening this trilateral alliance. The attempt to blame North Korea for infiltrating the National Assembly and perverting the workings of the South Korean state is preposterous. I mean, North Korea does all kinds of quite reprehensible things, but it doesn't do that. And the suggestion that opposition deputies of the National Assembly were North Korean stooges was simply wrong. These people may have had quite a different vision of how South Korea should be from President Yoon, but that doesn't make them North Korean spies.
John Everard, former British ambassador to North Korea.